As a woman, you had the hardest time in the concentration camp. Many terrible things happened to them. Unthinkable sexual experiments were done. But the story gets even more horrible if you know which experiment is still used today, because that makes it even weirder. Forced labor. Forced labor was a central component of the systematic exploitation and dehumanization that women endured in Nazi concentration camps. Women were subjected to grueling and often life-threatening work assignments that aimed to maximize their productivity for the Nazi war effort. The forced labor they endured encompassed a wide range of tasks, including factory work, agriculture, construction, and other physically demanding activities. Women in concentration camps were often assigned to work in factories that produced war materials and goods for the Nazi regime. These factories were typically located within or near the camps. Women were forced to engage in repetitive and physically taxing tasks, such as assembling machinery, producing uniforms, manufacturing weapons, and assembling electrical components. The work was demanding and often required long hours of labor in harsh and unsanitary conditions. The conditions under which women were forced to work were deliberately designed to exhaust and weaken them physically and mentally. Inadequate food rations, a lack of proper rest, and constant pressure from guards resulted in a rapid deterioration of health. Sexual violence. Women in concentration camps were vulnerable to sexual violence at the hands of SS guards who wielded absolute power and authority over the prisoners. Guards would exploit their positions of dominance to subject women to sexual abuse, rape, and various forms of humiliation. These acts were intended to further degrade and dehumanize the victims, eroding any semblance of dignity or agency they might have retained. Male prisoners within the camps, though themselves victims of the Nazi regime, sometimes engaged in predatory behavior towards their fellow female prisoners. Some male prisoners, coerced by the harsh conditions and the dehumanizing environment, committed acts of sexual violence against women. This tragic betrayal within the ranks of the oppressed added another layer of trauma and despair to the lives of the women. Inhumane living conditions. Women in concentration camps were often crammed into barracks that were designed to hold a fraction of the number of prisoners they were forced to accommodate. The lack of space meant that women were forced to sleep on straw-filled pallets or makeshift beds, with barely enough room to move. The overcrowding not only denied them personal space, but also increased the risk of the rapid spread of diseases. The meager food rations provided to women were grossly inadequate for sustaining their physical health. Malnutrition was rampant, leading to extreme weight loss, weakness, and a compromised immune system. The lack of essential nutrients further weakened their ability to endure the harsh conditions and resist diseases. Hygiene facilities were virtually non-existent in many camps. Women had limited access to water for personal hygiene, and sanitation conditions were appalling. The lack of proper toilets and washing facilities exposed them to the risk of infections, diseases, and the spread of lice and other parasites. Selections and gas chambers. The process of selection and the use of gas chambers were chilling components of the systematic genocide perpetrated by the Nazis in concentration camps. Women, along with men and children, were subjected to these horrifying practices that aimed to exterminate those deemed unfit for forced labor and, in doing so, erase entire populations from existence. New prisoners were subject to selections made by SS officers or medical personnel upon arrival at concentration camps. These selections were ruthless assessments of the prisoner's physical condition, age, and apparent ability to perform forced labor. Those who were considered fit for labor were temporarily spared from immediate execution, while those deemed unfit faced a dire fate. Including the elderly, sick, pregnant women, and young children were sent to gas chambers for mass extermination. These chambers were designed to resemble showers, misleading victims until the last moments. Upon entering, victims were exposed to deadly chemicals, usually Zyklon B, which led to a swift and agonizing death by suffocation. The use of gas chambers marked the industrialization of genocide. These facilities were constructed with efficiency in mind and were capable of killing thousands of people in a single session. This method allowed the Nazis to carry out mass extermination on an unprecedented scale, erasing entire communities and families in a short period of time. Forced abortions and infanticide. Pregnant women in the camps faced agonizing choices. The prospect of childbirth under the brutal conditions of the camps was perilous for both the mother and the child. As a result, many pregnant women were subjected to forced abortions, often performed without anesthesia or proper medical care. These abortions were not carried out for the well-being of the women, but were rather a means to eliminate any potential new life that could pose a burden on the Nazi machinery of forced labor and extermination. For those who managed to give birth, their newborns faced grim fates. Infants born in the camps were often murdered shortly after birth, either by lethal injection, suffocation, or other brutal means. The Nazi authorities saw these infants as disposable and sought to eradicate any traces of life that did not align with their twisted ideology. The murder of infants was a callous demonstration of the regime's disregard for the sanctity of life. The few instances where mothers were allowed to keep their babies were rare exceptions and often occurred when the baby could potentially serve as an object of medical experimentation. In most cases, however, mothers were forcibly separated from their newborns, deepening the psychological anguish of losing their children. Medical neglect. Medical neglect within Nazi concentration camps was a deliberate and cruel aspect of the overall strategy to dehumanize and eliminate prisoners. Women who became ill or injured faced severe challenges in obtaining even minimal medical care, as the Nazi authorities prioritized their agenda of exploitation and extermination over the well-being of the prisoners. Concentration camps were not equipped with adequate medical facilities or trained medical personnel. The overwhelming number of ill and injured prisoners frequently overwhelmed the meager medical facilities that did exist. This lack of resources meant that even basic medical care was scarce. Medical experiments. The medical experiments carried out in Nazi concentration camps mark a somber period in human history that is characterized by unfathomable cruelty and disregard for human life. Women, particularly twins, were subjected to these inhumane experiments, which pushed the boundaries of ethical and moral standards to inflict pain, suffering, and death in the name of pseudoscientific research. Twins were of particular interest to Nazi doctors, who believed that studying identical and fraternal twins could provide insights into genetics, heredity, and other areas of human biology. These twins, including women, were subjected to experiments due to their genetic similarities, which allowed researchers to compare their responses to various treatments. Many medical experiments entailed unpleasant, invasive procedures without anesthesia. Women were operated on to investigate the consequences of the procedures, not to heal or improve their health. Patients suffered severe pain and lasting disability from these operations. Thanks for watching. See you next time.